Great new day to all my self-care family and friends. Welcome back to the Room to Breathe podcast. I am your host, Life Coach 614, and I am so happy that you made space to be here with us today. Now, before we get into this episode, do me a quick favor. If you're feeling our vibes, go ahead and show us some love. Tap the screen, like, comment, but most importantly, I need you to share this out with someone who may need a little healing energy today. And if this is your first time here or you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that follow button. Subscribe to our channel so that way you're always tapped in when a new episode drops. I also want to personally invite you to check out our digital home at theselfcareclub.org, where you can find everything from affirmative apparel to motivational merch, as well as a ton of free resources to nourish your growth and remind you that you are supported every step of the way. Just know that you don't have to do this alone. We are healing in community, growing one breath, one moment, one day at a time. So today, I encourage you to give yourself permission to pause, to reflect, and to make space for peace, for growth, but most importantly for you. And if there is anything from today's episode that hits home, I want you to drop a green heart in the chat. That is our community's way of saying I am healing, I am growing, and I am showing up for me. Now, let's get ready to breathe, reflect, and grow together. Family, today we are talking about something that looks so simple on the surface, but when you really sit with it, when you really let it settle into the places that you don't always look, it becomes one of the most transformative practices of your entire healing journey. And it is simply accountability. Can you guys put accountability in the chat for me? And you know what? Let me just be clear from the start. I'm not talking about the kind of accountability that people use to guilt trip you. Not the kind that they use to, weaponize to control you. Not the kind that many of us grew up with, where being held accountable meant blame, punishment, or even being called out in front of everybody. Because if we're being real, that's not accountability. That's humiliation dressed up as discipline, right? I'm talking about the kind of accountability that heals. The kind that grows you up without tearing you down. The kind that says, I love myself enough to tell myself the truth. The kind that grounds you in maturity and clarity and emotional peace. See, this kind of accountability doesn't point fingers, it opens eyes. It doesn't shame you, it strengthens you. And it doesn't make you feel small, right? It makes you feel more whole, more solid. It's the kind that teaches you how to show up with intention instead of impulse, with honesty instead of being so defensive all the time. It allows you to show up with clarity instead of a constant state of confusion, and with self-awareness instead of a self-protection, right? Because again, here's the real talk. When it comes to accountability, it isn't an attack. It's an invitation. An invitation to evolve, to communicate, to align your behavior with the person that you're becoming, to stop repeating cycles that never served you in the first place. Healing accountability says, let me hold a mirror, not as a weapon, but almost like a window back to myself. Hey, Arma, welcome in. Mabel, welcome in. And so again, you're saying, let me hold this mirror. Let me take an honest look at myself. Welcome in, Butterfly. It helps you to notice where your patterns run you, to notice where your boundaries are wavering, where your silence speaks louder than your words. where your ego tries to defend what your spirit is praying you release. Thank you for the heart, me. And honestly, when you embrace that kind of accountability, let me tell you something. You step into a level of power and peace that can't be shaken. And it's not because you're perfect. It's because you're present, right? You're showing up for you. Because you're conscious, you're woke. Because you're willing to grow through the things that once knocked you down. And so today, we're not talking about accountability as a form of punishment. We're talking about accountability as the ultimate protection. It's protection for your peace, your relationships, your boundaries, for the healed version of you that you're stepping into day by day. So again, throughout the chat today, I want to see, accountability, right? We're going to have that word trending today if possible. Because I think it's something that everyone needs to truly embrace and step into. Again, not as a form of punishment, but as a means of protecting ourselves, right? Protecting what we've worked so hard to build. And so I just want to go back to my earliest story of accountability, right? The story that started it all for me. I'm going to take you guys back for a moment, back to a time where life was simpler, but the lessons were just as real. Back when I was teaching kindergarten, standing in front of a room of bright-eyed babies who were, still learning how to navigate the world, how to share, how to speak up, how to take turns, how to say my bad without, just a little bit of courage and a whole lot of innocence, right? Welcome in, Mars. I remember wanting to teach them something deeper, right? More than the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. I wanted to teach them something that would matter for the rest of their lives. Something even grown folks struggle with. And that was accountability. So one day I told them a story, a simple little story that, felt like playtime to them, but it carried so much truth that, I feel like sometimes even grown people run from this truth. And it was a story that I heard. I think my dad might have told me this story, but it's a story of 4 people. Everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. Y'all got the characters? Let me say it again. 4 people. Everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. And so I told them that there was an important job that needs to be done. Everybody was asked to do it. And you think, that meant it was handled, right? But no. Everybody just assumed that somebody would step up. Anybody could have done it, but nobody actually did. And then somebody got mad because they felt like everybody should have handled it. Meanwhile, everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. And somehow everybody ended up blaming somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. Now, when I tell you I told the kids this story, they just laughed, right? They had no clue of what was happening because the names alone had them giggling, y'all. But even as they were laughing, those little babies caught the truth. They understood that when nobody takes responsibility, nothing gets done. When we assume that someone else will take the lead, we abandon our own role. When the assignment belongs to everyone, it ends up belonging to no one. And isn't that how life goes sometimes? It's like we assume that our friends should apologize first. We assume our partner knows our needs without saying a word. We assume that our siblings should have known better, that our boss understands the pressure that we're under, that the relationship will fix itself, that the healing will just happen if we keep avoiding the real conversations. But the reality of it is, assumptions become avoidance. Avoidance becomes resentment. Resentment becomes disconnection. And then suddenly we're living out the same, that same children's story in our adult relationships. Frustrated, confused, hurt, pointing fingers at somebody because nobody did what anybody could have, including us. And so that kindergarten lesson, it wasn't just for the babies. It ended up being a great lesson for me too. And now, every now and then I feel like I have to go back and visit that. And that's part of my accountability, right? Every now and again, I got to go back to elementary school and relearn the lesson. Because accountability asks us to look at our own reflection before we analyze anybody else's behavior. It asks us to step out of the role of victim when we're not actually powerless, right? It asks us to acknowledge our participation in that situation, not taking the blame for everything, but to recognize where we have influence, where we have choices, and where we chose to stay silent. I think that little story holds so much truth. And, that's if we assume that someone else will fix what's broken, we end up living in brokenness longer than we need to. And so before we move on and really get into this, I want to ask you a gentle question, not out of judgment, because we listen and we don't judge, right? Just an honest question. Where in your life have you been waiting on somebody, assuming that anybody could help, while you've been like the nobody in your own story? And I think that, once you have an understanding of that question, I think that's the first step in shifting from frustration to freedom. Welcome in, Focus Mental Health. It's all about the assumptions, right? Assumptions are the silent saboteur, right? Assumptions will ruin relationships long before honesty ever will. And I think the wild part is that most of us don't even realize how many assumptions that we carry in our connections. I see you, Kale. Assumptions, like I said, we just carry so many of them in our connections with people. Assumptions about expectations, about needs, about intentions, about what somebody should have known or could have done. See, assumptions are silent and sneaky and subtle, but they will sabotage your peace every single time. A lot of us were raised to be strong, to be independent, to figure it out on our own, to not bother anybody, right? To swallow our truth just to keep the peace. So instead of communicating directly, we assume that the people we love should just know, right? We assume that they can read our modes. We assume that they understand our boundaries. We assume that they notice when something is off. We assume they should respond in the same way that we respond. We assume they know our love language without ever hearing us speak it. But here's the truth that many of us don't want to admit. people can't honor what you haven't expressed. And yet, we still get disappointed. We still feel let down. We still feel forgotten, unseen, and unsupported. Not always because someone didn't care, simply because they didn't know. And how could they? Because we never said the words, we just carried the weight. Assumptions are the quiet gap between what we hoped would happen and what actually did. They're the space where expectations live without communication. They're the birthplace of resentment that we never talk about but always feel. And if I'm being real, as women, especially Black women, we have been conditioned to downplay our needs, right? We say I'm fine when we're being stretched thin. We say don't worry about it when our feelings are bruised. We say it's okay when it was absolutely not okay. We whisper our hurt while we scream our silence. But silence isn't clarity. Welcome back, Cece. Silence creates confusion. It makes people assume that you're okay. Silence allows patterns to continue that your heart can barely tolerate. And when we sit, then it's like we sit on the edge of our beds feeling unloved, when really we were just unheard. And we were unheard not because they silenced us, but because we never chose to speak up. And that's why accountability and assumptions can't coexist. Because accountability says, I have contributed to my disappointment by expecting what I never expressed. Right? And that doesn't erase what they did or didn't do, but it does return some of your power back to you. Because the moment that you start expressing your needs and your boundaries, your feelings and your expectations clearly to others, that's the moment that you stop living at the mercy of somebody else's awareness. When you communicate, you give people a chance to show up. When you clarify, you're protecting your peace. When you speak your honesty, you release the pressure that assumption places on your relationships. So I'm going to say this as gently as I can. Some of you have been assuming instead of articulating. You've been doing more expecting than expressing. And so I want you to ask yourself, what disappointment are you carrying that might shift the moment you actually just speak your truth out loud? Like, how can I make a change in my life? Hey, Monique. If I just open my mouth and speak my truth. And again, I'm not asking this to shame you. I'm not bringing this up to point fingers. I'm simply trying to raise awareness, because awareness is the doorway, right? And now that we see it, we can walk through it with intention. But we have to understand that accountability begins within, right? Accountability isn't about what they did. It's about what you're willing to see in yourself. And I know that it is so easy to focus on other people's behavior. It's easy to notice who disappointed you, who didn't show up, who dropped the ball, who hurt you, right? Who made assumptions and who misunderstood your heart. That it's easy to see all of that. But accountability, like real accountability, asks you a harder question. What was my part in this? What role did I play in that? And again, I say the question isn't about blame, because blame is harsh. It's heavy, right? It wounds the spirit. But accountability is different, because accountability is gentle. It's an invitation, not an accusation. So, when you think about accountability, it says, let me look at me first. Let me check my own patterns. Let me peep my own habits, right? Let me acknowledge where I stayed silent. Let me own where I ignored red flags. Let me recognize where I didn't communicate clearly. Let me admit where I contributed to this confusion. And see, that's grown woman work, ladies. Okay? Because I know we don't be wanting to admit our part. But we have to. Because again, this is the moment where healing becomes intentional instead of accidental. You can't control other people's actions, but you can absolutely examine your own. Some of us know that we stayed in a relationship far too long. We knew that it wasn't right from the start, but we stayed in there because we was hoping on potential. Right? And what happened? We still had to tuck our tail between our legs and get out of Dodge because it was exactly what we knew it was going to be. But I think that once you start to examine your own, when you really start to take an honest look at you, you reclaim your power that you didn't even realize that you gave away. Let me tell you what accountability isn't. Okay? It's not self-blame. It's not taking responsibility for somebody else's choices. It's not minimizing your pain. It's not excusing the harm. It's not making yourself the villain in your own story. Accountability is a willingness to reflect. It's the willingness to be honest, to grow, to notice your patterns before they become cycles. Accountability says, I can't change what happened, but I can change how I move forward. Right? I can change how I move as I continue to step forward. And that right there, if you think about it, that's how you break generational patterns. That's how you outgrow old versions of yourself. That is how you build healthier relationships, how you protect your peace. That is how you rise into the person that you've prayed to become. And sometimes accountability is acknowledging that you stayed longer than you should have. Sometimes it's admitting that you accepted less because you weren't fully loving yourself yet. Sometimes it's recognizing that you taught someone how to treat you by tolerating the things that hurt you. Sometimes it's accepting that you never spoke your truth, that you just hope they figure it out. But none of that is weakness. That's just awareness, right? And awareness is the birthplace of healing. So ask yourself, what truth in you is rising up right now as you listen to this? Where in your life is accountability asking you to look inward instead of outward? What part of your story needs honesty before it can receive healing? Just take a breath, breathe into it, put your hand over your heart if you can. Be gentle. Take a deep breath in. Let it out. Something as simple as just this reflection, taking this moment, is where the transformation begins. But again, it starts within. Melody Blue, welcome in. Just to touch on that really quick, Brooks, that's her truth, but it doesn't have to be yours. A lot of times people project their feelings and their emotions, but I don't know if you've taken the opportunity to just say, hey, I'm not going to partake in these conversations where you badmouth this person. You've got to just put your foot down. And when those conversations come up, because again, it's her truth. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to align it, but that's her truth. We experience people differently. So again, if you get pulled into a conversation where someone is speaking their truth and that is something that you don't want to hear, that you don't identify with, you get to exit. You get to choose what conversations that you are a part of. And sometimes we just have to leave people talking to themselves. But I don't know, again, if you've already spoken up to say, hey, this is not what I want. I do not like this. You can't change her view of him. But her experience doesn't have to be your truth. So yeah, I mean, even just looking at that situation, sit with that feeling and emotion until you can see the role that you are playing in you feeling how you feel about this situation. Not saying like, oh, any of this is your fault or anything, but at some point, like I said, we sit in conversations with people for too long. We stay in relationships with people for too long. We entertain BS from people for too long. And at some point, we just have to put our foot down and say, enough. Enough. That's not going to change her image of him, but it just changes your entertainment of her reenacting her truth. So I hope that helps. KB, welcome in. Jordan, I see you. Yeah, so I hope that helps. But again, sometimes it is simply us accepting that we never have spoken our truth. Right? We just hope that other people will figure it out. But we can't assume. And people can only be held accountable for what they know, not what you assume they know. And if the relationship is important, and this is for any situation, not just speaking to Brooks, this applies for everybody. If a person cares about you and if a person loves you and you speak your truth and you say, when you do this, this hurts me, this bothers me, this angers me, this frustrates me, whatever it is that it's bringing up for you. If you say, this is a hard no for me, if a person loves you and respects you and truly wants to be in your life, then they will accept the fact that you are healing. They will rise to the occasion. They can find somebody else to call and spit their truth to. I'm sure that there are a million things you can talk about and not that particular subject that is dancing on your nerves. And as parents, it is hard for us to understand that sometimes, especially when you are a parent who, let's say you're a single parent and now you're co-parenting with, your kid's dad or your kid's mom, right? And your relationship has ended. And let's say it ended for domestic violence. Okay. And y'all, maybe it was a verbally abusive relationship. He's a great dad. You two just couldn't click. Y'all were equally verbally abusive to one another. Y'all just never learned how to talk nice to each other. Okay? But y'all have this beautiful baby. So it is sometimes hard as a parent to separate the fact that the man that I was with was trash in a relationship, but he shows up every day for our child. And now I have to work twice as hard not to impose the way that I felt about him in the relationship versus who he is as a father. And so I'm not saying that she's right, but that is her truth and that is her relationship. She didn't experience that man as a father. She experienced him as her partner. And so it is hard. And, you know, if we think back to our parents, they didn't grow up in a generation that was healing. They grew up in a generation that was hiding. And they didn't learn it. And so now that we're here, and if you still have the opportunity, if your parents are still here and you know that that's a trauma trait that they passed down to you, you get to heal out loud, which could show them better. You know what I mean? And you have to focus on not passing that to your kids. So again, it just takes work. But again, that's where accountability shows up, because at some point somebody has to say, you know what? I understand why you're doing that, because like you said, I'm doing it too. Welcome in, Jazz and Jordan. You get to say, hey, I'm doing that too, but I don't want to do that. Now I see it. I know I don't like it when it happens to me, but I also recognize that I've done it to somebody else. And so now I have to be better for my kids. And it doesn't make a difference if your child is 3 or 30. At some point, you have to take accountability. And that means maybe if you have adult children, you have to have the conversation with them to say, I did you wrong. Many of us act like our mamas, and it drives us crazy. You're not the only one. But again, that's what we're talking about today. You have to hold the accountability mirror up to yourself. And you have to say, what role do I play in this? And I think that that's a very hard thing to do, because it forces us to be real with ourselves. And husbands have a way, y'all, of telling us the hard truth. They always know what to say to dance on our nerve, right? Even like the comment, like you said, oh, you act like your mom. So tell me you want a divorce without saying you want a divorce, because I'm finna chop your head off. Like, why would you say that? I mean, you probably right, but why would you say that? You know what I mean? Like, so sometimes I feel like God uses other people as mirrors to us. Because what he's trying to pour into us, we kind of miss it. So he has to utilize the person, our partner, right? To reveal some things to us. So try not to be so defensive. You said, not my dear sweet husband. Girl, bye. I know that's the lie detector test determined that to be a lie. But I mean, again, we do the same thing to them. Sometimes we have to deliver a message, okay? And sometimes a message has to be delivered to us. And even then, in that situation, we have to learn how to lead with I and not you, right? That is one of the biggest things that I feel like I have to teach my clients, is understanding the power of I. How you start a conversation determines how it ends. Y'all can argue about it with me if you want to, but I guarantee you, how you start a conversation is how it ends. Most of us, when we're hurt or disappointed or overwhelmed, we go straight into the you language. You didn't listen to me. You made me feel ignored. You didn't show up. You should have known better. You always do da 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 da. You never do da 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 da, right? But let's be honest. The moment somebody hears you, their spirit slips into defense mode. The walls go up, the heart closes. The conversation becomes a battlefield instead of a bridge. But when you lead with I, something softens. So when you show up and you say, I feel unheard, I realize I assumed instead of expressing. I got overwhelmed and didn't communicate clearly. I needed support and I didn't know how to say it. Or I felt hurt when that happened. Can y'all see the difference? You points a finger. I opens a door. It's like you attacks the person, but I explains the experience. You ignites defensiveness. I invites understanding. And it doesn't mean that you're letting anybody off the hook. It just means that you're choosing a healthier, more grounded way to be heard. Not just loud, right? Not just spitting words, but a manner to communicate where you can be understood. And that is part of maturity. And maturity doesn't mean a certain age, right? You could learn this in your 20s. You could just be learning this in your 50s. It just means that now you're mature enough and you're learning to communicate your truth without weaponizing your pain. And I can't promise you that the person on the other end is healed enough to recognize the difference. But that doesn't mean you stop leading with I. Welcome in, No Fear, No Doubt. I know that when I first started changing my language and I came into this relationship trying not to point the finger because I knew that in my past relationships, that was a problem. I was always pointing fingers. You did this, you ain't do this, you ain't say this. And so stepping into this relationship, about 10 years ago, when I first met my husband, I was very focused on the I statements. And I would say, things to him if we would have a little disagreement or whatever. And I would be like, well, I feel like, I could have done this better if I had more support, or I could do, whatever. I would try to lead with I. And then my husband would be like, you. And I'm like, but what I just said was I, meaning I stepped into this acknowledging that this is what I've done in this. And then my husband would still say, no, you. And I would just stop, like, am I speaking another language? Like, I just said I did this, or that I didn't do this. And then his response would be, yeah, because you said this and you didn't do that. So I had to then get him to understand, and I had to teach him about the you versus I. Because I started off by assuming he understood that. I started off assuming that he was healed enough to see where I was coming from. Jordan, you already know. Jordan, you know. But once I had that conversation with him and he started stepping into it, and so I would occasionally shift back into a you. You said, you this, you that. And then I would stop and I would say, like, I'm sorry, this is unnatural to me because I'm forcing myself to point the finger at you. But I can imagine that you don't like the way that feels. And he's like, I don't. And I said, and neither do I. Off the bench, welcome in. Neither do I. Okay. So sometimes we have to, teach them. So when you have the I statements and they don't receive it, don't throw in the towel. Don't think coach lied and that doesn't work. Thank you for the heart me. Because it does work. But sometimes we have to actually make sure that person is healed enough to understand it. Yeah, you said neither do I. What does Lonnie say? Period. You don't like it either. Period. But yeah. And you know what? Because we like to keep it all the way real, sometimes the way that we deliver the truth becomes bigger than the problem. Right? It gets bigger than the truth itself. Sometimes our tone overshadows our tenderness. Sometimes our frustration masks our vulnerability. And sometimes we're so used to defending ourselves that we forget how to express ourselves. Many of us have been in this fight mode, right? That fight or flight mode. I can remember, again, in the beginning of our relationship, co-parenting was hard. See, I came into this relationship a solo parent. My child is adopted. So it was just me and my kid. I get into this relationship and I got this person who's like stepping up, trying to be a great dad and all the things. But I don't know how to receive that. So I'm so busy trying to stay 20 steps ahead. And meanwhile, my husband, boyfriend at the time, is like, slow down, I got it. Let me help. Right guy, welcome in. And I'm like, I don't really know how to receive that. Like, I'll just do it. And he's like, I already did it. Now, instead of me just saying thank you because he already did it, I'm over here like, well, why would you do that? Well, you should have told me, and I wish I would have known. Like, y'all, I'm finding a problem with every single situation because I'm so used to having to do everything. I'm so used to being the strong woman that this man has showed up and I don't even know how to receive him. I done prayed for the man. We talked about that yesterday. I prayed for this man to show up in my life. And then God gives me the man packaged up and I don't even know how to receive it. Sometimes we are so used to defending ourselves, or we're so used to being the strong one. Single moms, you're so used to being the mom and the dad, right? That we now forget how to express ourselves. We don't comprehend how to receive the good. And so when you lead with I, that just reminds you that your experience matters. But it also leaves room. It leaves room for conversation, for clarity, for healing. And like I said, so in the beginning, I would run because I recognized so many red flags that I ignored in my other relationships that I thought just the smallest disagreement between he and I was a sign that I need to grab my go bag and be up out of here. And one time we had this, it was an argument, what I would consider an argument in co-parenting. I didn't like a certain way that he approached parenting with our son. And I don't know, like I was immediately just triggered. So I'm like so mad, so pissed off, and I don't even know what to say. And I know everything that was about to come out of my mouth was going to be bad. There was definitely no I in the conversation I was about to have with him. And all of a sudden I have gotten so worked up. And then because I've had so many toxic relationships in my past, I thought if I spoke my truth, if I spoke in a manner that would be angry and from frustration and from my hurt, that it was going to trigger an argument. So I didn't even give him the opportunity to argue. I didn't even give him the opportunity to talk to me about it. This is the one and only time, y'all. And it seems silly to even admit this now. This is the one and only time I have ever walked out the door in my relationship. And when I tell y'all, he bring that up to this day, when he'd be like, you left me. This is probably like a year into our relationship. This is before we got married. But I walked out the door. I left. I got in the car and I was like, I'm out of here. And I went to go stay the night at my best friend's house. And I was just like, I can't, because I knew that everything that was going to come out of my mouth was reckless. And so I thought I was being mature by running away because I needed to get myself together. But when I look back at it now, that was that fight or flight. And I knew I didn't want to fight. So I had to take flight. Like, I had to get out of there. And so then I came back. I can't believe I'm sharing this with y'all, but I came back home the next day and I parked my car in the driveway. I don't even know if Jordan knows this story, but I parked my car in the driveway and he was so afraid that I was going to leave again because, like, we weren't talking. It's so tense. It's just me and him home at this point. And we were not speaking to one another. And so I backed my car in the driveway. I think I went to go take a nap or something. I wake up and he has blocked me in. So, like, he had his work car and then his personal vehicle. And he blocks me in the driveway because he's like, I bet you she don't leave me again. Yeah. And then even that had kind of triggered me. So I spent the whole afternoon trying to figure out how I was going to take flight again. But at this point, y'all, I realized that I was just being petty. I was being immature and I was making him pay for the relationships of my past because I ignored flags before. And, you know, so it held up a mirror for me. And again, I didn't understand it in that moment, you know, but when you stop and actually just look at the situation, when you are willing to take accountability, I can now clearly see the role that I played in that disagreement, that argument, you know, and never in a million years did I think that he would hurt me or mistreat me or anything. But I was triggered from my abusive relationships in the past. And so I had to be able to accept the fact that I was unhealed in situations. And that something as simple, I remember now, we were talking in the kitchen and apparently I wasn't listening. Welcome in, Coach. And I'll honestly say, y'all, probably just really wasn't listening to what he was saying because I was too busy pointing the finger in this moment. And he pounded his hand on the table, on the island. And he was like, And then he said what he said in an elevated tone. And immediately I was like, it's time to go. And that was only because I had stayed too long in previous toxic relationships. Never ever has my husband raised his hand, like just never. But I had assumed that he knew that something just as simple as elevating your voice in an argument or pounding on something was a trigger for me. I assumed that he knew that. And it wasn't until I came back and I grew up and, you know, was ready to have that mature conversation with him a couple days later that he was able to understand that. And he apologized, you know, because he could see now how that could trigger me. And so over the years, if we have a disagreement, you know, he's very careful to point out our tone because he remembers that. You know, he'll tell me all the time, yeah, she left me. Yeah, and he jokes about it now. He'll be like, yeah, I remember that one time my wife left me. And I'm like, first of all, I wasn't even your wife yet, sir. But again, like I said, it's all about accountability, you guys. You have to be willing to look at yourself and see the role that you play, the trauma that you bring into the relationship or the situation. And when you choose to lead with the I, it just, again, reminds you that your experience in this matters. Girl, I would say it's because he's a Gemini, but his sister is a Gemini and she in here and she a snitch. So yeah, you right though, Mars. He extra. But again, you guys, that's just a reminder how sometimes our tone can overshadow our tenderness. And so again, when you lead with the I, it shares that your experience matters, but it also leaves room for that conversation, because a conversation does need to be had, right? It leaves room for the healing, because the healing is necessary. And, when you lead with I, it sounds like, I want to understand what happened here, not attack you. I want to resolve this. I don't want to keep fighting about it. I want this connection, not the chaos. I am trying to communicate, not control you. Sometimes the I statements aren't for them, it's for you. Yeah, snitches get stitches. Y'all better tell her. Sometimes it's just simply to remind you that you're allowed to feel how you feel. To remind yourself that your voice deserves to be heard. That expressing your truth is an act of self-respect. To remind yourself that emotional maturity is not silence, it's clarity. And leading with I is also a boundary in disguise. It tells the other person that I am responsible for my experience and I need you to be responsible for yours. Big Joe, welcome in. This is where we create that space where accountability can live on both sides. So ask yourself, am I trying to be right? Or am I trying to be understood? Am I trying to communicate my truth? Or am I projecting my hurt? Brooks, write that one down, because that pertains to what we talked about earlier. Am I communicating my truth, or am I projecting my hurt? Am I leading with my ego or my emotional maturity? And these questions, right? The words that you choose, right, sets the tone for the healing that you're trying to create. So reflecting on these questions helps to open that door. Let the I bring you back to yourself. I think it's also important that we talk about impact and intent. And we have to understand that impact is greater than intent. I think that this is a part where a lot of us get stuck. Not because we don't care, but because it's uncomfortable to hold that mirror in the gap between our heart and our behavior. And so let's just talk a little bit about intent and impact. Most of us move through our life with good intentions, right? We don't wake up trying to hurt people. We don't set out to disappoint anyone. We don't plan to overlook people's feelings. We don't purposely ignore boundaries. But here's where accountability calls us higher. Your intentions don't erase your impact. Just because you weren't trying to cause harm doesn't mean harm wasn't caused. Just because you meant well doesn't mean it landed well. Just because your heart was in the right place doesn't mean that your actions were. And I think that that is one of the hardest truths of emotional maturity. It's like you can be a good person and still have moments where your behavior hurt others. Acknowledging your impact isn't the same as beating yourself up. It's not the same as taking on blame for things that you didn't do. It's not the same as letting people guilt trip you. Acknowledging impact simply says, I see how this affected you, even though it wasn't my intention. I see how this affected you. And that takes courage and humility and softness. It takes a willingness to be human and still accountable. Because sometimes you'll say something jokingly and it'll hit a person's wound. Sometimes you'll forget something that meant everything to someone else. Sometimes your silence will speak louder than you intended it to. Sometimes your delivery will overshadow your message. And sometimes you'll be so focused on survival mode that someone feels pushed to the background. Which part, Kale? Your intentions do not erase your impact. Oh, I see how this affected you. Oh, I see how this affected you, even though that wasn't my intention. So we didn't say but, right? We just simply say, I see how this affected you, even though that wasn't my intention. I still see that you're bothered by this. Lady T, welcome in. So again, it doesn't make you selfish. It doesn't make you uncaring. And it doesn't make you the villain in their story. It just makes you real. It makes you human. Accountability asks, can you hold space for their experience without defending your ego? Intent says, I didn't mean it. Impact says, but it still mattered. So you can tell a person, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't intend on hurting you. But how you feel right now still matters. Intent looks inward. Impact looks outward. And healing, real healing, happens when both things are acknowledged. When someone trusts you enough to say, this hurt me, they're not attacking you. They're inviting you into a moment of repair. They're saying, I care about this connection enough to be honest. That I value what we have enough to tell the truth. I want us to move forward, but I need you to understand my heart. I need you to understand where I'm coming from. And so when you receive that and you can respond with, I hear you. I see the impact. I'm willing to take ownership. You create safety. You create trust. You're creating connection, and ultimately you're creating healing. Carpe diem, welcome in. This is where your relationships will deepen, where those cycles will break, and where emotional intimacy grows. Because when you honor somebody else's experience, even when it challenges your intention, you're choosing growth over ego. The person that you're becoming doesn't run from accountability. They embody it with grace. So we've got to get out of this finger pointing trap. And just stay with me, y'all, because I think this part is another healing sting, but it's the kind that is gonna, you know how when you have a cut and you got to put a little peroxide on it and it sting a little? But that has to happen in order to clear out the infection so growth can happen. So let's just talk about this finger pointing trap. I'll try to make it quick. We're going to just rip the Band-Aid off, y'all. I'm talking about the moment when something goes wrong and our instinct is to find the nearest person to hold responsible. It's like blame becomes a reflex. Defensiveness becomes our armor, and our ego steps in and says, protect yourself, don't admit to anything, don't look inward, look outward, point the finger, blame them, it's their fault, right? Because what happens when we point the finger, it gives us a sense of control. It gives us a sense of moral high ground. It makes you feel justified and validated. Hell, sometimes even righteous, right? But the truth that many of us don't want to face is that blame might feel satisfying, but it solves nothing. The only thing that blame does is distract, deflect, delay healing. It closes the door to connection, and it keeps your growth on pause. Because the moment you point the finger outward, you stop looking at the three fingers that are pointing right back at you. You're so focused on what you're pointing at. And those three fingers, they're not accusing you. They're actually trying to call you to be higher. Acknowledging your part in something does not mean that the other person was right. It doesn't excuse their behavior. It does not cancel your feelings. It doesn't make their actions acceptable. It simply frees you from needing the other person to change before you can heal. It breaks the cycle of emotional stagnation. It keeps your heart soft and your spirit teachable. It makes room for clarity over chaos. Because honestly, blame is simply a shield that protects your ego but blocks your evolution. And you know what? Your ego loves to whisper. It tells you if you admit your part, you lose. If you take accountability, you'll look weak. If you apologize, they'll think they're right. But when you start healing, your healed self will whisper something completely different, right? It'll say, if I own my part, I take back my power. If I stop pointing fingers, I can start connecting dots. If I release the blame, I release the bitterness. If I choose accountability, I choose growth. See, when you stop pointing the finger, you start reflecting and you shift from victimhood to empowerment. You stop asking, why did they do this to me? And you start asking, what can this teach me? You stop rehearsing hurt over and over again, and you start rewriting the pattern. There is so much freedom in being able to say, I see my part and I'm willing to grow past it. Not because you're, taking responsibility for everything, but because you're taking responsibility for you. And when you do that, you move from reactive to intentional, from defensive to discerning, from wounded to wise. So ask yourself, where am I pointing fingers instead of doing the inner work? What am I trying to avoid by blaming somebody else? What lesson is waiting on the other side of my honesty? Because that's where the truth meets transformation. And understand that accountability creates connection. Relationships, whether romantic, platonic, family, professional, they don't fall apart because people are imperfect. They fall apart because people stop communicating, stop listening, stop taking ownership, stop creating safety. And so one of the greatest gifts that you can offer any relationship is a willingness to be accountable. When you take responsibility for your part, even if your part is small, even if your intentions were good, something powerful happens. Walls soften, hearts relax, defense drops, truth steps forward, and a healing space opens up. Accountability says to the other person, I care enough about this connection to be honest. I value what we have enough to acknowledge my impact. I want us to grow, not just coexist. And I know that a lot of people think that accountability kills connection, but that's not true. Avoidance kills connection. Silence kills connection. Defensiveness kills connections. Pride kills connections. And blame kills connections. But accountability builds the connections. It builds trust. It builds emotional intimacy and security, understanding. It builds a foundation where both people can feel safe to be real. Like, think about a time when someone was genuinely apologized, right? When somebody genuinely apologized to you. Not a half apology, not the I'm sorry you feel that way type of apology. Not the you being too sensitive, right? But the real kind where they said, I understand what I did. I see how that affected you. I'm not making excuses and I'm going to do better. Didn't that shift the energy instantly? Like, didn't that make you feel seen? Didn't that build the trust up instead of tearing it down? See, that's the kind of power that accountability carries. Welcome in, Kojo. And you know what? Here's the deeper layer. When you model accountability, you teach others how to show up with honesty. You show them what emotional maturity looks like. You show them what healthy communication feels like. You show them how to be in a relationship without the fear of being wrong. Because accountability isn't about who's right and who's wrong. It's about whether you're willing to meet each other where the truth lives. People feel safer with you when they know that you can acknowledge your missteps. Not because you're wrong all the time, but because you're reachable, because you're teachable. You're not guarded behind your ego. You're not impossible to talk to. You're not emotionally unavailable. Your accountability becomes like the door that opens and says, we can get through this together. We don't have to pretend. We don't have to perform. We don't have to be perfect. We can just be real and stay connected, right? Because that's intimacy and maturity. That's healing in relationship form. So just think about it. Where could accountability repair something that blame has been breaking in your life? Where could honesty deepen a bond that silence has been weakening? Where could owning your part open the door for someone else to own theirs? Remember, accountability doesn't push people away. It gives them a reason to stay. And so when we think about accountability as self-care, it's understanding that it is a form of self-care. Taking accountability is a form of self-care. It's one of the highest forms of self-love. And it's because accountability protects your peace and it honors your growth and aligns with the best version of yourself. It's, like I said, it protects your peace, right? When you take ownership of your part, your choices, your patterns, your responses, you stop living in emotional chaos. You stop going back and forth in your head. You shift from reacting to responding, from chaos to calm. Accountability is piecework. Accountability also strengthens your self-awareness. One of the most empowering things that you can say is, I see myself clearly. Because when you see you clearly, you stop repeating the same patterns. You stop choosing the same pain, the falling for the same traps. You stop accepting what doesn't nourish you. Awareness is liberation, and accountability is how you get there. Accountability builds confidence. People think that confidence is loud, but really it's not. Real confidence comes from knowing that you can trust yourself, that you can be honest with yourself, that you won't lie to yourself just to keep the peace, that you're willing to adjust and evolve and grow when needed. Being able to say, I didn't handle that well, but I'm correcting it, right? That is something that strengthens your confidence, not because you're perfect, but because you're just willing to be present in the moment. Accountability also honors your healing. You didn't survive everything that you survived just to go back to who you used to be. Your healing deserves honesty, maturity. It deserves your participation. And so every time you take accountability, you tell your inner self, I'm not abandoning you again. I'm not repeating that same cycle again. We're not learning that lesson again. That I'm choosing you. That's what inner alignment is, right? That's healing. It's restoration. Accountability also frees you from emotional baggage. Be honest. Some of y'all are carrying luggage that don't belong to y'all. To this day, y'all toting around these backpacks full of business that ain't yours. See, blame keeps you stuck in the same emotional place. Avoidance keeps you reliving that same hurt again and again. And denial keeps you recycling the same lesson. But accountability releases you. It says, I learned something here. I'm moving differently now. I'm not carrying this weight into the next lesson, into the next season. Freedom is found in the truth that you're brave enough to face. Accountability is a declaration of who you're becoming. When you choose accountability, you're declaring to yourself and to your life that you are no longer governed by your ego or fear or old patterns. You're declaring that I am evolving. I am aware. I'm honest. I'm intentional. I'm willing to grow. And when the healed version of you starts leading the conversation, everything else in your life will begin to shift. Your relationships will change. Your boundaries will strengthen. Your peace expands. Your alignment sharpens. Your confidence rises. Your spirit settles. Because you're not just holding other people accountable, you're holding yourself accountable to the person that you're becoming. So, family, hear me when I say accountability is not punishment. Accountability is empowerment. It is not a burden. It is a blessing. It is not a setback. It is a setup for your next level. Self-care isn't just about bubble baths and journaling. Self-care is about truth and clarity. It is saying, I can do better and I will. It is emotional responsibility. It is owning your part and letting the rest go. This is accountability redefined. This is accountability that heals, not harms. This accountability elevates, not embarrasses you. It's the kind that frees you, not traps you. This is the type of accountability that your healed self deserves. And, we always say, walk it like you talk it, right? Well, I want to say, walk it like you heal it. As you move into the rest of your week, I want you to hold this truth very close. And it's that you can't demand what you're unwilling to demonstrate. You can't expect ownership from others while avoiding it within yourself. You can't heal what you refuse to acknowledge. But when you embrace accountability with compassion, not punishment, you step into a new version of yourself, a version that is grounded, aligned, intentional, and emotionally mature. Your healing begins where your honesty begins. So, okay, guys, we done went over time. I'm all talked out. So listen, as we bring this conversation to a close, I want you to, first and foremost, just take a moment and just breathe with me. A slow inhale. A gentle exhale. Let your spirit settle. Take one more breath in. And exhale. Everything that we talked about today, the assumptions, the impact, the patterns, the ownership and connection, it all points back to one sacred truth. Your healing will always ask for your honesty. Not your perfection, not your performance, not your excuses, not your defensiveness. Just your honesty. Accountability is not about proving you're wrong or proving someone else right. It's about choosing growth over pride, choosing clarity over chaos, maturity over reaction. It's about choosing alignment over ego. And here's the beautiful part. Every single time you take accountability, you grow, you stretch, you evolve, you strengthen, you free yourself from the cycles that once held you hostage. You become a person who can look at their reflection with confidence and say, I am not running from the truth anymore. I'm not shrinking from my lessons. I'm not hiding behind blame or silence. I'm choosing to grow, even when it challenges me. Accountability doesn't take anything away from you. It adds to you. It refines you, matures you. It expands your emotional capacity. It deepens your relationships. And it gives you back the power that you once gave away. Because the moment that you become accountable for yourself, you stop negotiating your boundaries. You stop outsourcing your healing. You stop explaining your worth. You stop repeating cycles. But you also stop dimming your voice. You step into the person God has been molding you into your whole life. So as you step out into the rest of your day, your week, your season, I want you to hold this truth. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to get it wrong and still choose to get it right the next time. You are allowed to be human and still healing. You are allowed to own your part without abandoning your heart. And if nobody else has told you lately, I want to say that your willingness to be accountable is a sign of your strength, not your weakness. It is evidence of your healing, your maturity, and your emotional evolution. Now, before we part ways, let me leave you all with a little extra love and light. As always, I am here to encourage you to keep breathing through the highs, the lows, and every single moment in between. I want you to keep choosing peace, even if it feels out of reach. And know that here at the Self-Care Club, you will always be seen, always valued, and always supported. So don't be afraid to take up space, speak your truth, and make a little room for you to breathe. I love each and every one of you to life, and I am praying that your day is not just amazing, but aligned, intentional, and yes, on purpose, filled with purpose. This has been another Room to Breathe podcast, and I cannot wait to connect with you all.